Hello, everybody. How y'all doing? Good? Excellent. All right. So we're here to talk about media development in Liberia and a lot that goes into it. So I'll just get started. I'm going to introduce myself here. I'm Ken Harper. You can reach me at Prof. Ken Harper on the Twitter. And I'm an associate professor at the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. I teach multimedia, photography, design, interactive design, and print design. The other thing that I've recently been a part of is I'm the first director of the Newhouse Center for Global Engagement. And Newhouse Center is dedicated to bringing together a lot of different people to do a lot of different things. And that's kind of a little bit of what we're going to talk about today as well. So, Liberia. What do y'all think about Liberia? What comes to mind? First thing? Ebola. Yes. No doubt about it. Anything else? I'm sorry? Illegal logging. Ooh, that's a good one. Obscure, but very good. Totally. Yeah, there's a lot of illegal stuff that goes on in really poor parts of the world. Well, those things are definitely true. And, you know, Liberia's been through a lot. And I just kind of want to set the tone for the conversation today by presenting some images from Carolyn Cole from our 2004 Pulitzer Prize winning entry on the Civil War in Liberia, and some more recent work by Claire McDougall, a really wonderful journalist based in Liberia, for some more recent work. You know, Liberia went through a lot with almost 20 years of civil war and several 100,000 mostly civilians killed. That leaves an unbelievable scar on a country. And they're just now recovering from that. And along comes Ebola into a completely devastated health sector. And the media actually has also been very devastated from all this conflict. This gentleman was a pastor who actually died in his car waiting to be carried in to the main hospital in Monrovia just a few months ago. The kind of suffering that people go through there on the best of days is a little bit hard to imagine if you've not experienced it yourself. And if you can place yourself in the position of being a journalist in that environment for a moment, problems are compounded on trying to get things done on a basic level. They had to make makeshift tombstones for people, and large-scale graveyards were created. The reality was something almost unbearable for almost anybody. So You know, these are the stories we hear about Liberia, right? This is what we know about Liberia. When you think of Liberia, you think of poverty. You think of pain and war and all the worst that we have a tendency to give ourselves sometimes as a species. But at the same time, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, how do you operate in this environment? As a journalist, as a human, how do you operate at all? I mean, is a very fair question. And one of my favorite sayings in Liberia is small, small. They believe that you can only move forward in small steps. It's not Twitter speed. It's not a quick solution. It's the devastation of an entire society over decades, if not their entire history of being a republic. But during that time of Ebola, kids were getting together and singing vigils. This guy loves boobies, which I found just a great, funny, like in the middle of Ebola, there are people laughing. There are people singing. There are people dancing. There are people living their lives and trying to be funny in the midst of horrible things. And Claire McDougall has done a great job. You know, and since the war has come and gone, and Ebola is on its way out with the last reported death from Ebola just late last month. You know, Liberia is a place of pride in their country, of rebuilding, of moving forward small, small. I did not pee there. They're proud of their culture. People often take boats in rural Liberia just to get to school, carrying their own children. I mean, they're struggling, but they're struggling to move forward. Faith plays a huge part in the reconstruction of Liberia. You got to believe in something bigger than yourself to get through the kind of difficulties that they have on a daily basis. Education is finally coming back after Ebola. People are taking tests. They're starting to recover from that. The communication industry is really amazing and resilient because, you know, they had to live through this too. To get to work, they had to drive around the bodies of their neighbors. And their mom was shot or imprisoned. And their publisher or editor may or may not be corrupt. And they may have to take bribes in order to pay for their daughter's malaria treatment. This is real life. You know, if my daughter was dying, I'd lie as a journalist to get her malaria treatment. I don't know, would you? If your own child was suffering? Probably so, if you had no choice. One of the things that really impressed me in my time over the past 7 years of going to Liberia are some of the little cultural nuances. Like this, for instance. And it brings me back to a story of one of my friends there, David. He was, we were driving along the main drag there, Tubman Boulevard, and we see this huge poster. There's a picture of the president there. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, right? So first female president in Africa, real interesting person, you know, winner of many things, including a Nobel Prize. And it said, monkey still working, baboon weight small. And I said, what? I said, wow, David, what does that mean? Because let me tell you, if you called someone that is black a monkey in the United States, there would be some hell to pay. Like, I was completely confused. And I go, wow, in the United States, this would be really big. He goes, Ken, you're not in the United States. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. You're totally right. I am not in the United States. And he goes, here, monkeys are considered to be the smart ones. They're up in the trees, working hard. And the baboons are the ones on the floor of the forest, scavenging and picking up the things that the monkeys drop. And so this has played out in politics since Charles Taylor introduced this phrase. And Madam President co-opted this phrase, interestingly enough, from Charles Taylor and used it as part of her campaign slogan, which is really interesting. And it, you know, it makes you think about what's happening now with Ebola and how the media is handling it through cartoons, through protesting, and understanding stigma. You know, we refused entry to a lot of folks in the United States because of potential Ebola cases. And it's really tragic. I think we as a society, including the WHO and many other organizations, really fell and did not do a good job at really understanding what was happening. Made a lot of missteps. But they used, you know, cinema, right, to try and understand what is going on and make sense of it all. But they're recovering too from Ebola. They're taking those toys, soaking them in chlorine, drying them in the sun, and giving them back to children that lived. The medical supplies are being hung up and things are shifting. And, you know, if I were to think about how many institutions are in Liberia, especially the media, this image kind of comes to mind. There's a lot of renovation going on. There's a lot of hard work being done from decades of destruction, from the media being run by friends of the government, from Charles Taylor and other folks before him. So media development. What do you all think that means? Any ideas? No ideas at all. Come on, you can do it. Media development, anybody? Anybody? No? So, as you would imagine, right, it's like economic development for the media, of course. And at my school, the Newhouse School, and the Center for Global Engagement, we're more than journalism. We do other things. We work with entertainment professionals. So across the gamut of communications, from advertising to entertainment, nonfiction, and fiction professional storytellers. And so that's kind of what we've been up to. But honestly, after my time of actually initially going to Liberia in 2008, it became very apparent to me that you can't just drop into a country and pretend you know what you're doing. I mean, even the best journalists have a major struggle, and you may have heard of some of the controversy recently about a CBS reporter in the United States who went and did a very in-depth piece about Ebola and didn't talk to a Liberian. So I think it's very easy to make common mistakes when working abroad. And from my own experience, thinking about development and thinking about how to empower people to tell their own stories is a very long-term, slow process that involves a lot of collaboration. So I believe collectively is the only way we have any hope of working together to prevent things like Ebola, to be able to get information out to the people, not only through newspapers, but through cultural communication professionals like rap stars and fine artists and chalk artists. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the Newhouse Center for Global Engagement. And so the premise around what we're doing basically is the idea of collaboration, where we cannot do anything huge by ourselves. One thing I learned in Liberia is humility. Wow. You have to have a lot of humility there in order, or really, really good at fooling yourself that you are doing something that's actually helping anybody in reality on the ground. You have a lot of people come and go, a lot of people with good hearts, and there's various levels of, accomplishment inside of that. But I think long-term effects, long-term help is helping people tell their own stories. And I think that could be collectively really powerful. So our first pilot project to try this out in West Africa And more recently, we're heading to the West Bank and Nablus to work with some folks there over the summer as part of the center's work. But in Liberia, started a project called Together Liberia. Together Liberia was just born out of my experience working in Liberia through a friend, Kathleen Flynn, who's a photojournalist, wonderful person, and working in crowded halls with 50 or 80 journalists and trying to understand and teach ethics and teach composition of photography and blogging and web design and, you know, like all these things that you can take 4 years learning in any country. And so you're trying to explain this to folks who had to take 3, you know, shuttles to get there, riding on the back of a motorcycle. Their mom has malaria, you know, their daughter just passed away, and they're coming there for a Coke and a sandwich. And maybe they're gonna listen a little bit. And that's like, maybe it's a way to meet people, honestly. But I think, and from my experience, the only way is by developing relationships and working collectively so the burden isn't on any one person. So the project consisted of 5 US-based universities with 5 Liberian academic and media houses there. And we got to accomplish a few things. We brought in grad students from the United States, from Duke, from UNC Chapel Hill, from Syracuse, University of Oregon. And we trained Liberians over the course of about 3 months. And during that time, actually the run-up to our time, we actually had a big media drive, media equipment drive. So we raised $40,000 worth of gear that we used during the training that we left in Liberia. And so we partnered with a local nonprofit called iLab Liberia, and they set up an equipment checkout system. So we're not there just leaving them with nothing to work with after we're gone. They go out, they check out the equipment, they go tell their stories, they check their equipment back in, someone else takes the equipment and moves on. So it's thinking long term. It's trying your best to see what works and what doesn't. So multimedia training, you know, what went into that?
Well, I'm Kindness Newan from the Liberian Media Initiatives. I'm kind of interested in media because I like to be informed. As for the recorder, I've used recorder before, so it was nothing strange to me. But for the camera, at least I had no problem with it. You know, holding the camera, how to balance it and all stuff. I had problem with it, but as time went by, I got to know how to use the camera. The storytelling, it was kind of new to me because what we do here is we only collect stories, you know, we do with the politicians to really go to the common people and get their story or something we don't really do here. People in Riverside, they are very friendly, seriously. They are willing to talk to people, to explain their story, like the students. They were kind of sorrowful because they have only one high school, so sorrowful. And talking to them, most of them want to continue their education to go to college, especially for the girls. They're just there having children, because after graduation, they say they don't have the means to come to Monrovia to continue their education, so they just stay there and bear children. So it was kind of sorrowful. I really felt for the girls in Riverside. This project, seriously, I must admit, it will help me as a journalist, especially in storytelling, because we have been blind to it. So I want to say a big thank you to you guys.
So kindness. Kindness is an interesting woman. You know, the rate of rape in Liberia is about 80% for women. So nearly everybody has been sexually assaulted in Liberia that's a woman. And when you walk down the street, you can see the faces of harsh faces, just stern. You know, I've been in different parts of Africa, a few countries, but I'd never been anywhere where people were so fierce on their face when they walked down the street. And kindness was no different. When I first met her, I thought she might stab me or something. She just looked like, do not mess with me. You know, I will beat you up if you come near me, kind of look, right? And I was a little intimidated by that. But that's their street face, right? Because of what they've had to go through. And during the war, if you showed emotion when someone you cared about was being killed, they'd kill you too. And so this has really brought a very painful and difficult position to move forward from. But kindness, as soon as I talked to her, her face lit up, and she smiled and gave me a hug. She was a wonderfully kind, warm person who is a radio journalist. And she works now in rural Liberia, telling the stories of people out there. One of the other things that we did in the Together Liberia pilot project was mirroring a program called StoryCorps that's in the United States, where you have somebody interview their friend interviews them, your mother interviews your father about a big event, right? So imagine what kind of story a mother's going to tell a father as opposed to a professional journalist. It's a much different conversation. It's a lot more organic. It's a great method. So we stole that idea, right? Great people steal, supposedly. So we stole that idea, and we traveled around rural Liberia. This is Riversess, with the people we were working with in training, and we asked, what is education after the war? What does it mean to you? We collected these stories. We did stories about what is art. Manfred there on the left has been living in Liberia for 20 years. He's married to a Liberian, has children. He's a welder, does beautiful artwork made out of former weapons of war. Manfred Chesney. Anthony on the right there is a wood carver. And they were just discussing, what does art mean after war? What does it mean to a culture? Because art, especially when I first got there, was strangely absent from the conversation. Because the war had decimated, pretty much everything. Anthony was a good guy. We told the stories of Tycoon J and Nasty Man, and they interviewed each other. They're both local rap stars. Well, Robbie is reggae, technically, there, on the left. And they asked each other what it was like to record and dodge bullets while going to the recording studio. They had to dodge bullets just to be able to make some music. And where are they at now? And what's happening now in the music scene in West Africa and Liberia specifically? And what role does that have in communication and culture? It's a collective role. And luckily, through the kind donation of a lot of different people, we were able to take a lot of gear in and leave it. I come from doing a lot of web design professionally. I used to work at newspapers for many years, and I did web design, print design, and photojournalism. And so I ran into these web developers who worked at newspapers. And they rented out this little space by the airport, downtown airport. And during the week, they would leave a cell phone there, and that cell phone would get the internet, and then they would put that in a network, and that would have a couple of really, really old computers tied to it, and people would come in and check their email and things like that, and that paid for the rent and the electricity. But on Friday nights, after a long week of work, they got together, and they taught each other whatever they learned that week at their competing newspapers. If they learned some PHP, they'd pass that knowledge. If they learned about Google Webmaster Tools, they'd throw that down. If they forgot a new trick in InDesign, they'd talk about that. And so they would come in after deadline, 10, 11 at night, work till 6 in the morning, often sleeping on the concrete floor to help each other. That's amazing. I mean, can you imagine doing that? That's great. These people are just awesome. I'd like you to pay attention also to Thomas in the back here and Francis in the front. Two individuals that have come into my life more recently in a more heavy way that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. There's Francis. So one of the things we taught them, we just taught them basic use of some Google Webmaster Tools and some front-end design and development stuff while I was there during the course of 3 months. Solomon. And we didn't stick with just journalists, like I said. We worked with other communicators, like Leslie Lume, a very, very talented fine artist in Liberia. What do you think of my microphone?
This microphone is lovely, and I tell you one thing, it is artistic. It is artistic. It is. I like it. It reminds me of the fur of a cat, you know, of cats. But it is artistic. Everything we do is art. Even this camera was designed by an artist. Everything, what we wear, the shades, the trousers we wear, the pants, they were all designed by artists. And I mean, the world we live in, the architecture, the roads, the cars, everything, the airplanes, the ship, everything is just art. The way you speak, the way you talk, the way we eat, the way we do things. What you're doing now is an art. It's a form of art. This is what we call the art of what? Robbing, or the art of feeling, as you may call it. I shouldn't have had this on.
Okay.
This is a call from CNN.
So Leslie was getting a call from CNN during when we just started our interview there, and we're having a little bit of fun with the microphone, because those things are fun, right? I mean, you can tickle people with them, they're great. It's awesome, be able to relieve some tension. And so working with Leslie was a real treat, and we continue to work with him. And what we did with the web designers was we trained them to create websites for the local artists. And so in that small room with one light bulb, we created a website for Manfred Chesney at Frykuna Metalworks, who takes AK-47s and rocket launchers and makes works of art. We created a website for Nasty Man. So if someone wanted to find out about reggae and the music movement in Liberia, they actually could have some sort of professional reference. We photographed, and this is actually a photograph by Ansu Kroma, one of the trainees of Tycoon J. We didn't just leave it there. When we did, working with a local organization, iLab, that we started the gear drive with, we went and I did some ballet. It was really fun. Good joking. It's okay. You can laugh later. We trained them how to update their own sites. We trained them how to speak for themselves, just from a technical standpoint. It's just giving them a stage. Again, the whole point is, I think international journalism coming in and telling stories, I mean, it's a must-have, no doubt about it. But no one's going to tell the story of Liberia like Liberians, right? Duh. It makes common sense. They just need to have the tool set to be able to do that on an international stage and understand what that market means and how to present information at that kind of quality level, basically. And with this, we started thinking about what kind of partnerships we can have. One of the great partnerships we started with was New Narratives. New Narratives is an amazing organization. I've been working with them on their digital stuff. Their whole point is in-depth training. They work with folks, with fellows. They have between 4 and 8 fellows traditionally. They have an in-country director, and that in-country director is there for at least 9 months out of the year. And they work on in-depth stories. So part of what Newhouse did was we went in and we made a promotional video for them to be able to help raise money for what they do. And as a part of that, I'd like to introduce you to Maya Zongo. She's pretty well known now. She's really received some well-deserved accolades for her work with New Narratives and FrontpageAfrica, our main partner in Liberia. May wrote a story as part of the New Narratives long-term project on female genital cutting. And in Liberia, that is a topic you do not talk about and no one has ever talked about in the press. They did a multi-part series on that, and it raised quite a fuss. People came after her. They tried to kidnap her daughter. She had to go into hiding. It was a big deal. And thank God she turned out to be fine. The government actually turned around and made the practice illegal by working with local spiritual leaders to find other means of making, again, revenue. And a lot of the problems come back to this. And it's corruption. There's corruption because people aren't making a living wage. And they have to feed their families. And journalists are not immune from that. More recently, we're working with Accountability Lab. Accountability Lab is part of the Open Government Partnership. And we have interns in Nepal and Liberia. It's a visual residency program. They work with grassroots organizations to help keep governments accountable for what they're doing. There's about 60-some signatories to this agreement to open up their data and make it accessible to regular people who can't read. How do you make data available to people who can't read in rural Liberia? Well, they work with Leslie Lume and other artists to create murals without words that describe what's going on. They have a local film school called the Accountability Film School, where they go into the slums in West Point and train people on how to tell video stories. And they, in turn, tell video stories about the police in their local slum. It's really, really interesting when you think about collective action and what people can do together. FrontpageAfrica, again, is our main partner there. This is Rodney Sieh. Rodney fled the war. He comes from a family of publishers in Liberia, and he actually lived in Syracuse, New York, which is where Syracuse University is, for a while, working at the local paper there. And my first time I was in Liberia, I was sitting next to a photographer, a great guy named Sandamore. It's like the grandfather of photojournalism in Liberia, real warm, big man. And he's like, Ken, do you know Rodney Sieh? And I'm like, no, who's that? He's like, oh, he used to live in Syracuse. You got to talk to him. So he hands me the phone. He's like, hey, let's get together and we'll have a beer. A great beer in Liberia, by the way. I mean, beer's in the name, right? So it's really good. It's kind of like Stella. It's called Club Beer. It's wonderful. So we started working with FrontpageAfrica, and we did a print redesign with our students at Syracuse University. And one of the more exciting things that we actually did beside media training was we brought over their lead designer and cartoonist, Chase Walker. Chase lived with me and my family for about 6 months and got more training on media and development, specifically motion storytelling. So media training, print redesign, rebranding of FrontpageAfrica, and a visiting journalist program came out of that partnership with the local industry. And that's continued. Government partnerships. Ooh. Yes, there's a dark story here, as you might imagine, right? So, last August, I was contacted. Remember that guy I told you to remember? Thomas? Thomas was working for the Ministry of Information and the United Nations. He actually just moved over to the United Nations. And he called me while I was in a conference for journalism educators. And I was in a data visualization workshop when he contacted me. And he said, Ken, would you be interested in working with the government to create a website to visualize the Ebola numbers so it's accessible to people? And I'm like, I've never done anything that intense, online with data visualization. I've done infographics, but okay, let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. So I work with Professor Dan Pacheco here, and we found a great group of people. Collectively, we were able to work with the government of Liberia, the Ministry of Information, Thomas here. That's my homeboy. He's a good dude, great guy. So it was a collective action between two universities, UNC Chapel Hill and their School of Journalism, the Liberian Ministry of Information, Ministry of Health, faculty, students, former students that now work in industry, including IDEO, a very well-known human-centered design organization, international organization. And we were able to create EbolaInLiberia.org using open source material. The turnaround was about 2 weeks from the time I got a call to the time we had a site, and the very interesting ride began. And what's interesting for me, especially, is logistically, is, you know, I got this call 2 weeks before my school started. So my students weren't even around to even try to tap them for help. So I reached out to my friends at like a competing school, technically, to say, hey, this is not, we need this now. Not yesterday, I can't wait 2 weeks, we need to start now. Within a day, server was set up. Within a few days, we had CartoDB working. Within a few more days, we got spreadsheets were formatted in a reasonable fashion. And so every day, we got a new set of site reps with the updated numbers for each county, and each county, and each county. And we're able to put this together for a number of, well, a while. Reality. It's painful sometimes. I mean, it's painful for a lot more people than myself. Ebola, reality and conflicts. So after about a month and a half of having a live site, about 2 months, the data quit coming. And I have a phone call with the Minister of Information, Minister Brown, for about an hour. And there were some internal conflicts of who should be doing it and why. And some people were upset that we got to it first, I guess. And things happened, and then it just quit coming. And as a part of this, I'd like to share with you a brief story about, I was at a workshop with a bunch of people who research conflict. And I was out on this deck and on a lake. It was beautiful. The sun was setting. I had a glass of wine in my hand. And Thomas calls me from Liberia. You see, our friend Francis, who was in the front row, hadn't been heard from in 2 weeks. His brother died of Ebola. His father contracted it, and he carried his father to the hospital. We were supposed to be working with Francis on the data project, but we haven't been able to find him. We didn't know where he was. He's like, Ken. I'm like, yeah. He's like, what are you doing? I tell him where I'm at. He's like, wow. He's like, okay. Well, I've heard from Francis. I said, oh, he's alive? That's great. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. He's like, yeah, but it's not that good. I'm like, okay. So it goes on to tell me about what was happening with the data and how it had met a lot of politics and the data wasn't coming anymore. And he knew the numbers weren't legitimate, very much underreported because of a lot of reasons. And then came the story about Francis. He said, Francis called me screaming and crying because he was starving and dying in the hospital. They had been feeding him rancid food. And he said, Ken, you know, I went down there and he's like, I have to drive around some of these things all the time, but I couldn't believe what I saw. Women and children crying and bleeding in the grass by the dozens in the hospital lawn. People screaming. The head doctor running out in the street saying the numbers are lying. They're lying. Why are they lying about the numbers? And I'm like, oh, this is directly relevant to what we're doing. What are the ethics? What are we doing? Was it appropriate to do this? Was it wrong? Wow. He said, I finally got some food to him. And he had to go back every day to deliver his food and see this every day. Our data specialist was, had Ebola. So Francis called me one day. He said, Ken. I said, Francis. He's like, I'm alive. And I'm like, yay. He made it. He made it. He beat Ebola. And the data still stopped. And so we just had to call it for what it was, a really good learning experience that hopefully helped some people. We know the president used the site. We know some doctors used the site. It was an official Ministry of Information project. But you have to try to know right? These things aren't going to happen by just guessing. You have to see what happens. You have to create that minimally viable product on a practical sense and see what works, see what doesn't, and revise how you handle yourself and what you produce and who you're working with. Really important. So, the first time I ever went to Liberia, I went to work with the ministry, or went to the University of Liberia and their school. Does anybody know who Joe Mulba is by chance? Anybody, like the Liberia folks type interested in here? No? So, Joe Mulba, the head of the communication school at the time for many years. Joe Mulba's last job was the Minister of Information for Charles Taylor. So it would be a little bit like Joseph Goebbels running the journalism school in Berlin after World War II, to give you a little bit of context. What? And one of his lead professors, by the name of Chroma, was a former warlord who was famous for many atrocities, teaching journalism. Do y'all see what I'm talking about, small, small? About you have to be really thoughtful and think about progress in a really different way, and how educational that is for everybody, for myself, guaranteed, for the students that I bring to Liberia, for anybody involved, all parties, you know, all parties. So, Senator Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson was another gentleman I met during an interview with one of my friends, John Colley, who's a well-known radio personality producer there, and tells some great stories. And he said, "Hey, Ken, I'm going to go meet Prince Johnson for an interview about the election. Do you want to come?" I'm like totally unprepared. I didn't have a camera on me. I had my phone. I looked disheveled, and I'm like, "Okay, let's go." He's like, "I don't know if he's going to let you in." And I'm like, "Really? Why?" He goes, "Because you're white." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "He thinks white people are the devil." And I'm like, I don't think it's a pigment, you know. I don't think it's a pigment thing, but I can understand the confusion. And so, give you a little context on Prince Johnson. Prince Johnson is wildly famous in Liberia for many things. One of which is being a warlord of the largest, the most populous county in Liberia. And he's most famous on YouTube for executing President Doe and then eating his ear. Don't look it up. It's something you don't want in your head, basically. All right? And so he's been quiet. He wears a red fez. He's like, "You want to go meet this guy?" I'm like, "Okay, let's go meet this guy." So I find myself being transported to his home in a little community called Painesville. No kidding. And we're going through the slum, and there's his compound, really nice. Security agents open it up with their suits, earpieces, right? They open the gates. We go in, beautiful home, not huge, but beautiful. He has this hut they call the Palava Hut, which is like a meeting place for debate and making peace and things like that. But this beautiful Palava Hut, and to the left is this little patch of grass, half the size of this room, with a steer in it, like a giant, like a cow, right? A steer tied to a stake and one goat. And there's Mr. Johnson with his red fez. Very interesting experience. And so we interviewed, or John really interviewed Senator Johnson. We made our way out, you know. I tried to be as polite as possible with meeting a war criminal. I mean, what would you do if you met somebody who you think was responsible for killing, I don't know, an insane amount of people, like personally, right? Would you shake his hand in his house? I don't know. I was in his house. I shook his hand. I don't know. I'm not sure if that was good or not, but I didn't want to piss him off. That's what I'm saying. So we left. We made our way to listen, transcribe what was said to a restaurant in Monrovia. And we ate, and I left. And John Colley calls me. He says, "Ken, you're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Prince Johnson just called me." And he said, "Hey, John, "Where are your car keys?" So John looks for his car keys in the restaurant. They're gone. We drove there. They're gone. He goes, "Oh, you left them at my house. You should come and get them. And you should rethink the way you ask questions." He's like, "Ken, the old ways are still here. This is what they do. But this is passing, as all things are, right? None of us are here forever, including the people who make really, really bad choices that affect other people." Joel Moba has since passed away. He's no longer the head of the communication school at the University of Liberia. Prince Johnson came in third during the last presidential elections. One man's freedom fighter, right? So, depends on what side of the line you're on during the Civil War and what you think about him. It's complicated. So back to complications. Remember we were talking about my main partner, Rodney Sieh, FrontpageAfrica? The day Chase Walker lands and moves into my house, the artist, into my son's room, we get a call. Rodney Sieh has been thrown in jail for publishing a government report about corruption. Like, what? Wow. That's surreal. The same day that Hillary Clinton and Bono and Skrillex and some other folks were giving awards to the former warlords that ended the war 10 years previously. They're putting my buddy Rodney in prison for publishing a government report. And I like you too. Damn it. I was just irritated by it. It's awful. So we decided to do something about it. When one of your own, is in trouble, you do whatever you can do. So we started the Free Rodney Press Freedom Campaign. We created a website. We created a video. Students created the video based off of material we already had. We had just been there 6 months previous. We created a t-shirt campaign. Dan's got a t-shirt. You should have worn it, right? We created an online petition on change.org. And what else did we do? Oh yeah, we met with the president. So we got our local press freedom lawyer involved at Newhouse, and they actually met with the president of Liberia to discuss this. We raised hell as much as we possibly could, from our little small perch at Newhouse to help our friend who was in a lot of trouble. So the short of it is, 3 months later, after being in a prison with rapists and murderers, literally in the same room, he was freed. And we were really thankful for that. And to kind of give you an idea of the kind of work that was produced from that, this is part of the website. And this is the video.
When I started FrontpageAfrica, my whole idea was to revolutionize this country in terms of media. We've actually been successful in finding our niche as an investigative newspaper that address the needs of ordinary people. We've been able to get the national government attention to issues of prostitution, poverty, gender discrimination. We managed to break some of the biggest scandals in Liberia. And there's a lot of cases where the establishment feel like some of the things that have been reported are not in their favor, and they use all kinds of means to try and stop it from getting out there. Newspapers have been shut down or editors in prison. So there's been a lot of difficulties in really getting these stories out there because it's a risk. I think that makes us in the vanguard of what Liberia's new media should be.
So our students took that media that we had collected 6 months prior where we was talking about other publishers being thrown in jail. He knew something was coming. And sure enough, it did. And he's back telling stories now. They shut down the paper, but they didn't keep it shut down. And now he's fighting with issues about corruption around all the Ebola money. Can you imagine all the billions that weren't used? Where's that going? Whoa, big story, big story. It's probably even bigger story on where the money goes with media development and how it's used by big outfits. Nobody's immune. So this is part of the website we created. We tried to convince people why they should care, all the accolades, all the stories they had done on gender equality, on female genital mutilation, on corruption, things that had never been reported for in Liberia, Front Page was doing, and Rodney was at the front of it. He was the first paper to run online, and in fact, most of the revenue comes from online sources, online revenue, from advertising from the diaspora. It's diaspora-funded journalism, and so that navigates around the corruption. Does anybody have any idea how much a journalist might make in Liberia? Take a guess. $100. That's 50. About $50 a month. Gas, when I was there, was $4 a gallon. Do the math, right? Who's not going to be corrupt? Journalists aren't respected there because journalists were a mouthpiece. Alajo Moba, rest his soul, for decades and decades and decades. So it's going to take generation, small, to change the minds of the people. It's going to take education of what media is, of what journalism is in the elementary school level for school children from the bottom up. It is not a Twitter fix, it's not a technology fix, it's not any one thing, and it's too big for any individual or organization to really handle. It needs collective action. And I think we saw some of that finally hit with Ebola when finally people woke up. And there was a big collective action where the world came together and worked with all the very, 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 very strong people in West Africa that has put largely a halt to that. I love the cartoons that Chase did. He did them in I loved it. My kids were exposed to this, which was fabulous, like just to see this in action. It was wonderful. He would create these cartoons. And this one was really great. I should have blown this one up. She said that the press was, had poisonous pens. And so he drew a bunch of snakes with pens chasing her. And we actually put that phrase on the back of the T-shirt. We kind of reclaimed her dismissive poetry of the press. So we had that call to action, and it worked. We were part of that campaign, along with CPJ, Community Protect Journalists, ICFJ, and Amnesty International, and many other folks. So we played our part, and we were very happy to do so. Well, that's it. That's what I've learned. I think it's like the magnitude is really intense. But the strength of the people is equally or more so than the trouble that they're in. And especially the journalists, because they have a tough road, man. A tough road. So it takes a lot of collective action to make it happen. And as a part of this, I just want to say that this idea of collective action between industry, between academia, between nonprofits, maybe not government as much. It was a little rough, but we all try, right? We try. We see. You do what you can. Emergency is an emergency. You do what you can. And we need help figuring this out. We need help figuring this out, not just in Liberia. So, if you're interested in thinking about projects, not just in Liberia, but other places, it's an open call to have a discussion and see what can be done. Because I really believe everybody benefits when they tackle something that is almost unmovable. I think it's the only hope for us as a species, personally. And that's why I like journalists. Tenacious. Tenacious. Strong. So I'm just going to leave you with some sites that are a part of some of the projects that we've worked on, if you're curious. And a big special thank you to Carolyn Cole, Los Angeles Times, and Claire McDougall for offering their images as a part of the introduction to this presentation. So now what I'd like to do, guys, is just, if you're interested, just to talk until we can't talk anymore, because they'll kick us out. So, does anybody want to talk? Question? Yes. Okay. Sure. Oh. Interview? Sure. Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm Roberta Villa, I'm a health journalist, and as you well know, lack of information and misinformation had a relevant role in the spread of Ebola disease. And are you aware of the importance of this building, more than rebuilding, information system in Liberia and in other countries probably, also as a preventative measure for future possible outbreaks?
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. I mean, communication, right? Information is power. And, you know, there's another interesting phrase in Liberia, a great English word, confusion. You know, I think confusion is born out of a lack of information. Confusion is synonymous with violence in Liberia, literally.
Same word.
It's the same, it means the same thing. So say there was a fight at a political rally and someone got killed. They wouldn't say, somebody got killed. They would probably say, there was confusion. That's telling. And so the building of information structures, the communication industry that speaks to different segments of society, whether it's entertainment, right? Whether it's journalism, whether it's just general development that's happening, you know, in the schools or elsewhere, government accountability, these kind of things, like with Accountability Lab. I think it has to happen all together with a great deal of humility, and I think that's often the missing element with a lot of really smart folks that have a lot of money. And so my hope is, in playing some small role, is to work collectively and try and move small, you know, forward in that, in the rebuilding.
Thanks for your talk. I was hoping you could talk a little more about the practicalities of how you arranged this. Do you make the plans in advance? Mm-hmm. How do you pick the organizations and kind of those general issues?
Wow. Yeah. You can make all kinds of plans you want. And we did. We went to, well, originally with the Together Liberia project, we went to go cover the election with, you know, partnering with their election officials. And we got there and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, kidding me? It completely fell apart, you know? We got 15 people there. And so, you know what? We did something else. We came up with these workshops, these long-term workshops over 3 months, and worked with people and just changed it on the ground. So I think you have to start somewhere. If you start with something you think is finished, you're fooling yourself. Things are going to shift. That's just the reality. It happens in the best of circumstances. When you're in the most difficult of circumstances, it happens 10 times more. So you have to be really flexible. You have to go have a beer and think of what else to do. That's constructive, you know? And so it took me years to understand what the hell was going on in Liberia. Now, mind you, I'd only go 2-3 weeks at a time, right? Because I teach full-time. And so I go on spring break or Christmas or over the summer or something, I only get so much money to go travel. And my school's been very supportive of me. I'm very thankful for that. But trying to find people you can trust That takes a while, you know? You look at their actions. A lot of people can talk. A lot of people can talk really well. But it's just watching what they do over a longer period of time. And you can do that to a degree. Often, who's causing the most trouble for the power brokers? It's probably a good sign that they're doing something correct. If they're getting thrown in jail, that's also probably a good sign that they might be good to work with. Potentially, of course, you have to keep your brain on during that process. But yeah, it takes a while. It takes a while. And I met a lot of great people. And those first workshops I talked about, working with the State Department in the embassy of training these 80 journalists at a time, I met a couple. So it wasn't like a complete waste, you know, quote unquote. And I don't know exactly what all 80 people got out of whatever I had to say. But I got to meet some people and over time develop relationships and follow what they were working on and what organizations they were working on and how they conducted themselves. And we were able to bring several of them back. One did a photojournalism workshop in Kentucky called the Mountain Workshops. It's a great photojournalism workshop in Kentucky I do every year. mountainworkshops.org, by the way. So, you know, it's just having that exchange and vetting people, just like you would a friend. It's kind of like dating, you know? You're like, oh, man, your online thing looks great. And then you meet them, and they're like, oh, wow, you're a wreck, you know? But eventually you meet somebody, you're like, hey, you're awesome. And so, I mean, it's the same thing. It's kind of like professional dating. You just figure it out. You just hang out with people, watch what they do, and see who's worth, who's the right fit, should I say. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm Eva. I'm a data journalism trainer in developing countries. So a lot of this really resonated. And I was wondering a bit about your impact measurements, because, you know, we work in a lot of places where your impact is not.
Sure.
It's not going to be super clear. And again,
No doubt.
And I kind of like the online dating example, because often in these countries there's only a handful of really good journalists. And if there's Ebola or a war, they're busy. Like, they're not coming to your workshops. Like, if you're not known in that country, like, how do you leverage networks to make sure that you have the right journalists who really could benefit, but they're really busy because they're producing some of the best journalism in the country already?
Yeah.
So sort of that in the design phase, and then also how do you measure impact, and what would you do differently if you were to deploy a similar program in another area?
A lot of it comes down to resources. One of the people that we were with during that 2011 project was a monitoring and evaluation specialist. That's what she had her master's degree in from UNC. And she, that's exactly what she did. She did evaluations and reports and surveys of the people we trained. And I think the vetting, it just comes back to trying to find one person you can trust, and then who do they trust, right? So by a natural extension, good people usually hang out with good people. And so I think that's part of the equation. And if I think about impact, I think about Rodney Sieh being free. I think about all the stories of female genital mutilation actually happening. You know, I think about, you know, countless stories that happened, and the New Democrat now having, you know, an archiving process for all their photography. So I think redesign for FrontpageAfrica, training for people coming into Liberia. If it was my full-time job, I could go way deep into it, but it's not. It's my part-time thing that I really care about because I met people I care about. That's why I keep going back. It's not because it's Liberia or because it's, you know, this is the first, like, this trip I went, oh my God, I'm going to Italy. This is gonna be so awesome. I've never been here. It's gorgeous. There's not like a high level of things that are happening right here. I know there's a lot of problems everywhere in the world, and Italy is no different than that. But for me now, like, oh, you know, I've been going to Liberia and the West Bank, and I wouldn't change it for the world, but it can be challenging, you know, if that's not your life. If you're not from that, it can be challenging. So being humble and trying to be honest and admit when what you did was a complete failure and not try and pretend it wasn't.
Well, I mean, I was talking more about like the metrics of it because
Yeah,
in
sure.
a lot of these places you're going to try a lot of things that have maybe, like for example, in the West Bank, I've done data journalism training there, and the level of basic education is much higher. So you have to figure out beforehand where can you gauge it, what topic would resonate. Like if you're doing a training on, for example, photojournalism, what thematic topic would be
No doubt.
most relevant? Like, do you have a system?
That's
and can I
where
steal it?
that's where the collaboration honestly comes in, because no one person or one school or one organization can do everything. We rely on people like Accountability Lab that have proven methodology for what they're doing, and you know, acute transparency of where they're spending their money. They have a live Google spreadsheet that updates every night where every cent of their money goes on accountabilitylab.org. You know, it's working with people that are experts in all these fields that are deep, you know, and finding people you can trust and letting them do that part of it. You know, it was a bigger thing, but I think a lot of it's just finding somebody who is awesome that you can trust and then moving forward together. And then you pick up a little bit of what they have along the way to add to your own resume of knowledge. Hopefully that was helpful. Anybody else? Are we good? We got one more? Is one more okay? No, we got to kill it? I'll talk to you right after. All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it. Peace, peace.